The wind hit hard on Ironbrush Ridge, sharp enough to cut breath. Ada Loomis stepped off the winter coach, boots as deep in snow, while the driver laughed loud. 7 women ran off this hill, he said. Make her number 8. She said nothing, just pulled her scarf tighter and walked toward the cabin. Inside, Jonah Pike lit a stove too small and offered a coat too big. They didn't speak much that first night, just patched cracks, rationed beans, and marked storm signs in a ledger. She'd worked in factories. He'd buried hope. Now the mountain watched them both. When the next coach comes, will she be gone like the rest? Or is this the woman who stays? The coach creaked under the strain as it climbed the last frozen curve of Ironbrush Ridge. Snow had drifted knee-deep along the bends, and the horses breathed steam like engines. Hank Cobb slapped the reins with a grunt, his boots up on the splintered box rail, voice loud in the cold. 7 before her, he chuckled, spitting into the snow. All ran screaming. First one lasted a week. 4th made it a month. Last gal didn't even unpack. What makes this one different, huh? The woman inside didn't answer. She adjusted her grip on the small trunk in her lap, her gloved knuckles white. A threadbare scarf wrapped tight under her chin, hiding most of her face, but not the set of her jaw. Name's Ada Loomis, Hank went on, as if she wasn't right there. He yanked a folded paper from his coat and read in a loud, mocking tone. Height, medium, age 31, sturdy build, background, factory seamstress, quote, willing to attempt frontier conditions. He laughed again. Returnable within 90 days if deemed unsuited. Like a damn plow mule. The coach rocked to a halt. Ahead stood a cabin, half swallowed by snow and pine. Smoke curled thin from the chimney. The shutters were shut tight, the logs silvered with age. Beside it, a man leaned on a shovel, sweat freezing in his beard. Welcome back to paradise, Hank muttered. Jonah. Pike, you poor stubborn fool. Jonah didn't smile as Hank hopped down and flung the coach door wide. Ada stepped out slowly, legs stiff from the ride. Her boots sank instantly into powder, but she didn't flinch. She squinted into the wind, then nodded at Jonah. He gave a small nod back. Miss Loomis? That's right. I'm Jonah. She moved past Hank without a word. The driver rolled his eyes and heaved the trunk into the snowbank. Don't bother getting too cozy, he called after her. I'll be back on the 10th to haul her down when she freezes or quits, whichever comes first. Ada didn't turn. She trudged toward the door. Jonah opened it and stepped aside, letting her go in first. Inside, the cabin was dim, lit only by the orange breath of a small fire. The air smelled of pine pitch and cold iron. The room was simple: table, stove, bunk, 2 chairs, a trunk, and a workbench covered in tools. A ledger sat open near the lamp, pages smudged with soot and neat columns of numbers. Jonah hung his coat, then offered a thicker one from the peg. Might be warmer. Ada shook her head and removed her scarf. Her cheeks were red from the wind, but her eyes were clear. You get 7 others up here? She asked plainly. Jonah nodded. Not all at once. Ada's gaze swept the room. She walked the perimeter, checking the window seams with her fingers, testing the door latch, eyeing the draft from under the bunk. I'll need a needle, linen scraps, and something to plug that sill, she said, pointing. I got burlap and waxed thread, Jonah offered. Good. We'll need to seal this place before dark. He watched her move. Practical, no hesitation, not angry, not flustered. She moved like someone who had worked without heat before. They spent the next hour stitching seams, stacking blankets against cracks, and setting pans beneath the slow leak by the stovepipe. Jonah handed her the ledger. I've been tracking fuel use. Got 4 weeks of wood if we ration right. Ada flipped through the pages, nodding. I'll draw up a chart tonight. Rotation every 3rd bundle, and we sleep with the stove banked low. They didn't speak again until the wind picked up, howling like a wild thing outside. Snow scraped the shutters like claws. Ada sat at the table, pencil in hand, scribbling notes in neat rows. Jonah ladled 2 bowls of thin stew and passed one to her. She ate quietly, eyes never leaving the page. When the lamp guttered low, she tilted her head. That driver, he mean it? Coming back for me? Yeah, Jonah said, voice flat. He meant it. Ada laid the pencil down and folded the paper. Well, she said, he can bring a rope if he wants, but I'm not going back. Jonah stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, just a little. All right then. The storm blew harder. The cabin held. By the third morning, the ridge was choked with fog and cold enough to freeze soap in the basin. Jonah stepped outside to split kindling, but paused at the sound of hooves crunching through ice. Hank, Cobb's wagon creaked into the clearing again, his breath steaming as he climbed down with a wide grin and a thin packet in hand. He didn't bother to knock, just waved the envelope like a prize. "Morning, Pike. Got something from the broker. Says this one ain't suitable." Jonah took the paper, but didn't open it. Ada stood behind him in the doorway, arms folded, face unreadable. "She's right here," Jonah said evenly. "Why don't you let her speak for herself?" Hank scratched his cheek, fake puzzled. "Ain't about talking, son. It's about conditions. Broker says you get one more week before the match is void. Could cost you your credit line, too." He tipped his hat at Ada with mock politeness. "No offense, miss, but this ridge eats women alive. You're a sturdy sort, but this ain't factory work." Ada didn't blink. "No," she said. "It's survival. You just can't see the difference." Hank chuckled and climbed back into his seat. "I'll be back soon enough." One way or another, the wagon rattled off, taking the last trace of comfort with it. Jonah set the paper aside. "We got time." Ada nodded once. "Let's not waste it." That afternoon, she sorted the woodshed by size and burn rate, arranging stacks with chalk marks and tied tags. Jonah joined her after hauling water, and together they worked out a rotation chart. Green wood last, dry splits first, bark bundles for kindling. 3 bundles a day max, Ada muttered. More if the wind turns mean. "We'll adjust by week." That night, a knock sounded at the door. Unexpected, but not unfriendly. Brother Ames stood there with snow on his shoulders and a smile behind his wind-chapped face. "Just passing through. Thought I'd check on the only folks stubborn enough to winter up here." Jonah grinned and waved him in. The preacher warmed his hands near the fire, while Ada poured him tea. She explained the broker's threat, the letter, the thin ice under their feet. Brother Ames frowned. "Match contracts are shaky things, but if both of you agree to stay, there's a form that makes it stick. Mutual consent clause. I carry copies for folks who mean what they say." He pulled a folded affidavit from his coat and laid it on the table. "Sign it when you're ready. I'll witness it next time I pass through." Jonah looked at Ada. She nodded, once, but said nothing. Before he left, Ames touched Jonah's arm. "Be careful. The mercantile and the broker, well, they share more than gossip. Some folks profit off failure." Jonah's mouth tightened. "I figured." Later that week, Old Wick Bailey trudged up the trail with a sack of dry beans and a bag of nails. He tipped his hat to Ada, grinning under his beard. "Heard talk in town. Cobb's stirring it up. Says you're too good for this hill. I say, anyone who can patch seams in a blizzard is good enough for any man with sense." He leaned on his cane. "Watch the broker. Every failed match brings him a refund, and Cobb gets a slice of freight both ways. That's why he pushes returns." Ada said nothing, but that night she stayed up late reading the fine print in the contract by lantern light, lips moving soundlessly as she followed the ink. Snow began falling steady again. They packed extra sand near the door and tied ropes from cabin to woodshed in case the wind rose. When the storm hit, it hit hard. Days without sunlight, snow slamming the roof like fists, wolves howling from the tree line. Still, the fire held. So did they. They worked in silence and slept warm under rationed blankets. Ada read tracks in the snow each morning. Jonah taught her to read wind against the smoke. They weren't surviving anymore. They were learning the mountain. And for the first time, Jonah looked across the table and saw not a temporary guest, but a partner. Some folks quit when things get hard. Others grow roots deeper with every storm. If you've ever chosen to stay when the world expected you to leave, drop a comment. We'd ride that trail with you. Wind rasped against the cabin like sandpaper, against wood. It had been blowing for 2 days straight, and the snow hadn't let up once. Ada sat cross-legged on the floor near the stove, a quilt around her shoulders and the match contract spread across her knees. Her fingers moved slowly over the words, eyes narrowing. "Jonah," she said quietly, "this clause here, if either party files formal complaint within the first 30 days, the contract may be voided. But look at the next line." Jonah leaned over, wiping his hands on a rag. He'd just come in from checking the roofline for sag under the snow. "If no such complaint is lodged in that period, the agreement shall be considered mutually accepted," Ada read aloud. Jonah, today's the 34th day. He blinked. You sure? She turned the ledger around. First entry, the morning I arrived. I've been logging every day since he exhaled slow. That's the trail, pardner. Ada gave a small, proud smile. If neither of us filed a complaint, the broker's out of time. Jonas chuckled, the sound deep and rare. I reckon Hank's not gonna like that. She sat back, feeling warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the stove. Let's draft a reply. Something plain and lawful. We'll post it with Brother Ames next time he rides through. Together they penned it by lamplight. We, Ada Loomis and Jonah Pike, declare mutual consent and acceptance of the marriage agreement dated. Ada's handwriting was neat and firm. She folded it clean, sealed it with wax from the kitchen candle, and pressed her thumbprint beside Jonah's. Afterward, Jonah brought out a different kind of paper, his land claim file. Homestead grant needs proof of improvements. Government won't give you title just for breathing up here. Ada scanned the document. It says, evidence of residence, cultivation, and structural addition. Jonah nodded. I've done what I can, but 7 women came and left, and the cabin's the same as it was. Ada tapped the table thoughtfully. We build a workroom, off the back, fence the garden plot, document inventory, livestock, tools, crop plans. It's doable. We just have to show them we've built something real. He raised an eyebrow. Think we can get all that done by spring? She grinned. If you don't mind digging post holes in frost. He laughed again, shaking his head. The storm worsened. They banked the fire low and stacked sandbags against the door. Ropes between cabin and shed went taut under snow weight. Inside, the world shrank to the sound of wood snapping in the stove, the scratch of pencils, and the hush of pages turning. Each day, Ada tracked the storm in the ledger. Wind direction, pressure changes, soot tilt in the chimney. Jonah taught her to read those signs the way other folks read words. You get quiet first, he said one night, holding up a finger. Then you feel it in your chest. That low hum means a front's changing. She nodded, listening close. That's the kind of knowledge they don't print. Nope, Jonah said. You earn it with frostbite and bad guesses. They slept in shifts, took turns tending the fire. The seams held, the roof held, Ada held. One night, when the storm beat hardest, she woke to find Jonah crouched by the window, watching the dark. Something wrong? She asked, voice groggy. He shook his head. Just thinking. Every woman who came before, they were promised a story. Firelight, happy endings, pretty views. You weren't promised anything. Ada stood and joined him, looking out at the black swirl of wind and cold. That's fine, she said. I didn't come for a story. I came to work. Jonah turned to her, eyes searching. Still want to? Ada met his gaze. Yes. And for the first time, the wind didn't feel quite so loud. The sky cracked open blue and brilliant after 2 weeks of punishing gray. The wind eased. Snowbanks shrank under the mid-March sun, and the pine-scented air held the faintest promise of spring. It was Sunday. Jonah hitched the mule to the small sleigh. Ada packed, biscuits wrapped in cloth, a jar of berry preserves, and a worn book of verses she meant to trade for thread at the mercantile. The Sunday gathering in Dusty Creek wasn't just worship and music. It was how folks exchanged goods, news, and quiet judgments. You sure? Jonah asked, as he secured the sleigh's crossbars. Ada buttoned her coat. The folks have been talking about me since the day I arrived. They might as well talk to me, he smiled, proud and a little worried. You've got more grit than most ranchers I know. She climbed up beside him. Then let's ride. The town lay quiet beneath patchy snow. Church bells rang through still streets as neighbors gathered around potluck tables and warming barrels. Some looked up with curiosity when Jonah and Ada pulled in. Others quickly turned away. By the time the service ended, Hank Cobb was already near the fire pit with a mug in one hand and a story on his tongue. Well, well, he said, grinning too wide. The Ridge couple's come down to see. If they still count as married, Jonah dismounted in one smooth step. Just here for supplies, Hank. Oh, I bet. Trouble is, I don't think the mercantile sees your arrangement as permanent. He wagged a paper. New policy. No account credit until match status is verified. By broker Ada stepped forward, steady as snowmelt. What policy? That wasn't posted when I came for nails and salt. Hank raised his brow. Well, it's posted now. Brother Ames, leaning on the hitch rail nearby, cleared his throat. "Excuse me, but I was here last week. Nothing was posted, and I do believe I have a signed affidavit from the lady and Mr. Pike stating mutual consent. That makes the match lawful under state terms." Several townsfolk turned, listening now. Ada reached into her satchel. She held up the ration book, seam diagrams, and a log page. "We've held through 2 storms, used less than half the wood. I patched every coat in that cabin, and I'll show you the ledger if you care to look." Her voice was calm, not defensive, just true. A child tugged her sleeve. Little Clara Brooks, missing 2 front teeth, held up a pair of mended mittens. "You fix these." Ada softened. "They were too good to toss." Clara beamed. Jonah stood beside her, tall and quiet, and let Ada's words speak for both of them. Behind the mercantile counter, the young clerk, Micah Reynolds, pushed through the crowd, flustered. I was told to update policy sheets Friday, but I didn't post anything until this morning. We didn't backdate. It just wasn't made public." Brother Ames raised his hand. "Posting after enforcement? That's not regulation. I'll mention it in my circuit report." Hank scowled and stepped back, his smirk slipping. "Don't worry," Ada said. "We brought coin for today, but we won't be back on credit until the ledgers match the law." The crowd parted to let them through. Inside the store, Ada bartered cloth and beans for thread, nails, and salt. She paid with coin and calm, even when the manager peeked out from his office and said nothing. Outside, Jonah loaded the sleigh. "That was a good piece of work," he murmured. "Still unfinished," Ada replied. "They're trying to make it hard enough we give up." Jonah looked out over the ridgeline. "Then we won't." They started home as the sun dipped low, painting the snow gold. From the top of the trail, they looked back once. On the mercantile's wall, a new fee notice flapped stiff in the breeze. Official now, but still fresh. Ada tightened her grip on the satchel. "The next trick's coming," she said. The wind was softer now, carrying the scent of thawing earth. Icicles dripped steadily from the eaves of the cabin, and a crow called from somewhere near the ridge. Spring wasn't here yet, but it had stepped into the clearing. Ada stood at the back of the cabin with a length of twine in hand, marking off where the new workroom would go. Jonah watched from a few feet back, shovel resting on his shoulder. "Think we can get the posts in before the next freeze?" he asked. "If the sun holds," she said, pulling the twine taut, "and if your mule's as steady as you say." She's older than me and twice as stubborn. They shared a quiet grin. They had come home from town with their supplies, their dignity intact, and a fresh determination. First thing Monday morning, Jonah rode back down the mountain alone. This time, not for groceries, but to the deputy recorder's office with 2 documents in his saddlebag, their affidavit of mutual consent and the start of a homestead improvement plan. He paid the filing fee in coin, shook hands with the clerk, and walked out with a clean receipt. No drama, no shouting, just steady action. Back on the ridge, Ada had dug out the last of the seed packets from Jonah's trunk, squash, beans, and hardy root vegetables, and begun charting a garden square on the sun-facing slope. She'd just finished when the wagon rolled up. It was Hank. He didn't shout this time. He didn't laugh. He simply hopped down and slapped a folded slip into Ada's palm. "What's this?" she asked, opening it. "Pickup order," he said, smug. "Issued from the broker's office direct. Says your return is required, unpaid freight due. I'm here to collect, her and the balance." Jonah stepped up behind her, coat open, face unreadable. "You have no grounds," he said calmly. Hank shrugged. "Paper says otherwise. You can take it up with the sheriff." Ada's jaw tightened. "Did you really think we'd just fold?" Hank leaned in. "No, ma'am. I was hoping you'd fight it." "Makes it more interesting?" Jonah said nothing. He walked to the tool rack and pulled out a coil of boundary rope, then returned and calmly staked a line across the yard between the barn and the porch. He didn't cross it. He just stood there, quiet as stone. Behind him, Ada laid the consent letter and receipt of filing on the table by the window. Clear, visible, legal. Hank smirked. "That line's not law." Jonah finally spoke. "No, but this man is. Brother." Ames stepped out from the trees at the edge of the clearing, hat low, coat dusted with road dust. He'd just finished his circuit and arrived in time to see the whole thing. "I'll stand witness," he said. "You so much as reach for her, and I'll swear under oath that you broke the peace on filed land." Hank looked from Jonah to Ames, jaw twitching. "You'll hear from the sheriff." Jonah nodded. "Let's." Hank loaded back onto the wagon, the wood groaning under his boots. "This ain't over," he muttered as he rode off. The silence that followed felt like snow after a storm. Still, heavy, but no longer hostile. Jonah turned to Ada. "He'll come back with a badge." "I know," she said, her hands steady. That night, they didn't talk much. Ada stitched a torn hem. Jonah sharpened tools. Both were calm, but alert, like horses with ears turned towards something distant. They'd made a lawful stand. Now they'd wait to see if the law would stand with them. The sheriff didn't come fast. He never did. Sheriff Lyle Barton was the kind of man who believed most troubles burned out if folks were left to stew a while. But Dusty Creek was a small town, and gossip rode faster than law. He showed up on the ridge 3 days after Hank's failed pickup, riding a dun gelding and looking more tired than cross. His badge caught the late light. Ada saw it from the window as Jonah was hauling boards for the workroom foundation. "Don't jump to anything," Jonah said quietly, setting the boards down. "I won't," Ada replied, but her eyes followed the sheriff's every move. Lyle dismounted with a grunt, dusted off his coat, and nodded at them both. "Afternoon, Pike," Miss Loomis. "Sheriff," Jonah said, calm. Lyle looked around. "Heard you made a boundary." "That's so?" Jonah nodded. "Didn't cross it, just stood behind it, with a witness." "Brother Ames already told me, said Hank got loud, but didn't cross the line either. Still," Lyle sighed. "He's filed a complaint of interference. Says you obstructed a lawful retrieval." "That wasn't lawful," Ada said. She handed him the affidavit and the land improvement receipt. "And this says so." Lyle read both papers carefully. "I believe you, but I got a duty to process the complaint." Jonah stiffened. "What's that mean?" Lyle scratched the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. "It means I need you to come with me tonight." "Just overnight. We'll clear it up in the morning." Ada stepped forward. "He didn't do anything wrong." "I know," Lyle said gently, "but the mercantile's behind this too. And if I don't log it proper, they'll raise dust with the county." Jonah's jaw tightened. "So, I spend a night in a cell so Hank can feel like he won?" Lyle shrugged. "You got a better option?" Jonah looked at Ada. Her eyes were glassy, but her chin didn't tremble. "I'll be all right," he told her. "I'll keep the fire going," she said. "You just come back." He touched her arm briefly, then turned and followed the sheriff down the trail without another word. Ada watched them disappear into the dusk. Then she turned back toward the cabin, her hands shaking only once before she steadied them. She lit the lamps, checked the stove, brought in firewood. Her movements were quiet, measured, the silence of the ridge wrapped around her like a second coat. That night, she slept with Jonah's coat draped over the chair and the ledger open beside her. In the small town jail, Jonah sat on a cot, arms folded, staring at a loose nail in the plank wall. Hank strutted through the saloon just across the street, bragging about clearing off the ridge by morning. Sheriff Lyle sat in his office, sipping weak coffee and pretending not to hear. Come dawn, Jonah rose, stretched, and asked for pen and paper. "I remembered something," he said. Lyle handed it over without a word. Jonah spent an hour copying the Mercantile's new policy notice line for line from memory. Then he opened the ledger Ada had sent with him. She had slipped it into his satchel without saying. On a page near the back was a pressed receipt, dated 2 days before the policy change had been posted. He smiled faintly. When Lyle came back with the keys, Jonah handed him the scrap. "This," he said, "is your out." Lyle read it twice. "Backdated enforcement. Posted late, enforced early. I've got a witness and proof." Lyle tucked the paper into his coat. "You're free to go, Pike." Jonah stepped outside into the cold morning light. His breath fogged, and his boots left sharp prints in the frost. He didn't run, didn't rush, but he walked with a steadiness that meant something had turned. Dusty Creek hadn't seen a crowd like this in months. Word spread fast. Jonah Pike was walking into town with papers in hand and something worth listening to. Folks gathered outside the Mercantile, hats pulled low against the wind, eyes sharp with curiosity. Jonah didn't ride in, he walked. Boots dusty, jaw set, he moved slow and deliberate, like a man who didn't need to prove anything but had come to show something anyway. Beside him, Brother Ames kept pace, a folded statute book tucked under his arm and his preacher's collar just visible beneath his coat. Sheriff Lyle leaned on the hitch rail, watching with narrowed eyes. He hadn't said much since letting Jonah out, but his presence here meant he knew this wasn't over. Hank Cobb stood near the barrels, arms crossed, trying to look relaxed. His smirk came slower this time. Back already, Pike? Forget your soap and thread? Jonah didn't respond. Instead, he walked up to the public notice board nailed outside the Mercantile and tacked a single piece of paper to the wood. Then he turned to the growing crowd. "Folks," he said, voice quiet but firm, "I've got nothing to sell you. Just something you ought to see." He stepped aside. Brother Amy's read aloud. "According to Statute 4, Section 12 of Regional Mercantile Regulation, any change in customer policy, particularly regarding credit extension or freight collection, must be posted clearly for 7 consecutive days prior to enforcement." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jonah held up Ada's pressed receipt. "This shows we were denied goods 2 days before this new fee was posted." Brother Ames nodded. "And I took a photograph of that board last week. No such notice. That makes it a violation of both trade transparency and contract integrity," Hank scoffed, but his eyes darted toward the clerk, Micah, who had gone pale. "It was a memo from the office," Hank said. "Policy comes down fast." "But you enforced it before it was law," Jonah said. "And you told a man to collect my wife like she was freight. That's not enforcement. That's coercion." Micah stepped forward, wringing his hands. I just did what the manager told me." Lyle stepped forward now, pulling out the very same statute book from his coat. "Micah, who signed the enforcement memo?" The boy hesitated. It was initialed by Mr. Granger." "That's the store manager," Jonah said evenly. Lyle turned toward Hank. "Funny thing, that memo number you mentioned to me in the jailhouse wasn't on the public notice, but you knew it word for word." Hank's face tightened. "That suggests you saw internal papers before they were made public," Lyle continued, "which means you knew the policy wasn't active yet when you tried to enforce it." More murmurs. Some in the crowd stepped back, eyes hardening. "Far as I can tell," Lyle said, now loud enough for the whole street, "Jonah Pike didn't interfere with a lawful retrieval. He refused to comply with an unlawful one," Brother Ames added, "and I'll be forwarding this to the county clerk for record, along with my witness statement." The door to the Mercantile creaked open. Mr. Granger, red-faced and stiff, stepped out. "We'll strike the added fees. Credit will be extended to Mr. Pike," as before Ada's voice rang out across the square, clear as bells. She'd come quietly while the crowd was watching. "And the broker?" Granger swallowed. "The broker has been notified of mutual consent, and no further interference will come from our end." Hank turned to go. "Not so fast," Lyle said. "You're fined $10 for attempted false collection under contested policy." The crowd clapped, slow and soft. Jonah looked to Ada. She gave the faintest nod. They turned together and walked away. The days that followed were quieter. Not easy, not soft, but quiet in the way that meant relief. No more visits from Hank. No more veiled threats hanging in the air like smoke. Ada and Jonah returned to the ridge, with nothing but wind at their backs and the feel of solid ground beneath their boots. They didn't speak much about what happened in town. There was no need. Truth had done its work. Jonah hauled lumber up the slope one sled load at a time. Ada kept the stove warm and the ledger updated, now with a fresh page marked "Garden Plan, Early Spring." The patch of land they had set aside caught the longest sun, nestled between 2 granite shoulders that broke the wind and held warmth. Still, the soil was stubborn. The thaw was uneven. They'd lose half their seed if frost crept in again. Jonah walked the perimeter, boots squelching through the half-melt. "Maybe it's too early," he said, nudging a frozen clump with his toe. Ada frowned, kneeling to test the ground. "The topsoil's soft, but there's ice just below." They stood, gazing across the plot. Then Ada paused, her head tilted. "Do you hear that?" Jonah listened. At first, nothing. Then, faint, steady, beneath the birdsong and creak of trees, a trickle. They followed the sound uphill, just past the tool shed and toward the north ridge. There, nestled beneath a half-buried boulder and a tangle of dry vine, a thin line of steam curled into the air. Ada knelt. Her fingers touched the water and drew back, startled. "It's warm." Jonah crouched beside her, scooping a palmful. "It is." The earth there was different, softer, moss-covered even after snow. Ada scraped back the top layer with a stick. Steam rose stronger now, revealing a dark crack in the rocks. "A seep," Jonah said. "A heated spring, maybe, fed from under." They dug a narrow trench downhill, guiding the warm flow toward the edge of the garden plot. By late afternoon, the water had soaked the soil and the frost had receded. Ada looked up, cheeks flushed, hair messy from the work. Then, out of nowhere, she laughed. It wasn't the soft kind she gave Jonah when he said something dry. It was deep, surprised, almost childlike. Jonah blinked. That a good laugh or a bad one? She shook her head, still smiling. I don't know. I think the mountain just said yes. He grinned back. Took its time. They spent the next day laying flat stones for a cistern base and shaping shallow channels through the earth. It wasn't much water, but it didn't need to be. Just enough to keep roots from freezing and give seedlings a fighting chance. That night, as Ada stirred the stew pot and Jonah sharpened a chisel by the fire, she paused and looked over at him. I didn't believe places like this existed, she said. Not really. I thought maybe folks who left just didn't want to say they were lonely. He didn't answer right away. Then, most of them didn't leave because of the cold. She nodded. I know that now. Jonah leaned forward. And you? Why'd you come? Ada smiled softly. Because no one needed me back there. I wanted to find a place where I could matter. He set the chisel down. You do, he said. They didn't say anything more, but the silence between them had shifted. Not the silence of strangers, the silence of something growing. Spring arrived slow, but sure. The ridge softened. Snow pulled back from fence posts and retreated into ditches, leaving behind the smell of wet earth and pine sap. The creek that had been ice-thick now burbled with runoff, dancing over smooth stones like it had somewhere to be. The garden Ada and Jonah marked in frost had begun to hold warmth, thanks to the steady trickle from their hidden spring. They laid down seed in straight rows, squash, turnips, beans, nothing fancy, just food you could live on. The workroom, too, took shape. A modest addition with a slanted roof, one glass window salvaged from town, and enough room for storage, mending, and a proper table. Ada stitched quilts for neighbors in town, who had quietly started sending scraps. Jonah framed a small cot in the loft, just in case, he'd said. They didn't speak about what the cot meant, but it stayed there, fresh hay beneath it, blanket folded at the foot. Jonah filed their updated improvement log with the land agent. It came back marked approved. That meant the land was theirs now, fully, finally. One morning, after setting a row of traps near the tree line, Jonah returned to find Ada on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Someone's coming, she said. It was Brother Ames. He rode up slow, tipped his hat, and dismounted with the stiffness of a man who'd spent one too many nights on a borrowed cot. He carried a satchel and something rolled under his arm. I thought you might want this, he said, handing Jonah a sealed envelope with the county seal. Your homestead claims recorded and permanent. No more loopholes to chase, Ada exhaled, shoulders dropping just slightly. Thank you, Ames grinned. That's not all I brought. He unrolled a simple piece of parchment. At the top, in neat script, marriage certificate, Jonah Pike and Ada Loomis. Figured I'd ask this once and not again. Would you like to speak your vows proper? Ada looked at Jonah. He didn't hesitate. They stood on the porch, boots planted firm, wind tugging at their sleeves. Ames read the words, simple and clear. They repeated them steady, without flourish, without tremble. Jonah took her hand, calloused and warm. Ada's voice didn't shake when she said, yes. No rings, no guests, just the land and the wind and the porch they'd built together. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and lit the ridge in gold, Ada stood barefoot in the garden, gently brushing dirt from her hands. Jonah sat nearby, carving a handle for the cistern bucket. She looked over her shoulder. The soil's turning sweet. You can smell it now. He nodded. Things grow here. That night, they hung the certificate beside the ledger, the same one where Ada had once tracked firewood and storm signs. Now, she added a new section, weather patterns and planting notes. She'd started sketching tiny leaves beside dates. Jonah, quietly, had added a drawing of the spring, labeled in tidy block letters. Gift from the mountain. There was peace in the way they worked, but not idleness, not ease. Just the right kind of tired at the end of a day. Just the kind of silence that comes after long noise. A few months later, a traveling photographer passed through town and hiked the ridge after hearing stories of the woman who stayed. He asked to take their picture. Jonah didn't smile, but his arm rested firm around Ada's shoulder. She didn't pose, but her eyes held steady. Before the shutter clicked, Jonah said softly, "Tell folks this ain't luck." The photographer blinked. "Then what is it?" Ada answered. "It's work. Chosen work. Click. If you believe a good home is built, not bought, and some things are worth staying for, leave a comment, share this story, or pass it to someone who's still trying to build theirs. And if you're ready for the next quiet fight, we'll be here. Saddle up."